Hey everyone, my name is Friendzoned and welcome to the 6th episode of Friendzone Produces. If you're unfamiliar with the concept behind this series, basically anyone can fill up the form that you can find in the description to give me musical guidelines. In this form you can specify genres, moods, and other nerdy things that you would like me to consider when creating my next tracks. Today's guidelines come from no one actually. I just decided to create a track just based on what I was feeling at the moment, so no guidelines today. The way I will tackle this video is that I will first talk about the sort of creative process I've been through when making this track. So first I'll explain how it all came together, and then I'm going to take the track from start to finish, and each section I will break down what I think is the most interesting in terms of sound design or creation of some melodies, etc. So hopefully you can get some cool tricks out of there. So first and foremost, as you can see, this project file is quite massive. The track itself has got 109 MIDI and audio tracks. My sound design folder has got a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to break down what I think is the most interesting, but first, as I said, the creative process. So it all started when I went to a piano recital recently, so a classical piano recital, and one of the pieces that was played was the Gaspard de la Nuit suite by Ravel. And the number 2 of this suite is called Le Gibet, and it sounds like this. There's a link in the description if you want to listen to the whole piece. It's really nice, and when I went out of this classical concert, I was really feeling like, well, inspired, so I decided to drop it into Ableton, and I started from there. So this loop is the very first building block of this track. And from there, I just decided to sort of build upon this and bring this very nice chord progression as best as I could. The second influence I've had during the making of this track is the single Virtue by Overwork. This guy produced a 20-minute long single, and it's designed to be played as a loop. So when you arrive at the end of its track, then it goes back to the beginning really seamlessly. And this is also what I wanted to achieve with this track. So that was the second influence I've had. Next in the creative process, I was a bit stuck, so I decided to work with sound design. And if I go down there, this is the file I actually worked with to begin with. Basically what I did is that I cranked up the volume of my mic as loud as possible, and I just whispered some stuff into it. And the compression, I mean, you can see the wave file down there, but the whole thing got completely distorted and it clipped like crazy, but I decided to work with that. So if I just play this audio file, it sounds like this. So you can really hear that these sounds sound disgusting and they sound like shit really. But I decided to take this chop and drop it into some samplers in Ableton. And each of those lines and each of those pads and everything come from this one sample. I think I turned it into basses. Let's listen to it first. Yeah, there you go. So this is like a very tiny bit looped, run through some OTT and compression. And I created a whole bunch of patches just by using this sample. So you can hear how this created some interesting frequencies. And then the next step in the creative process was to put together this mid-bass chop right here. It sounds like this. And in context, I think it added a lot to the actual drop, but we'll come to that later. First of all, let us drop into the intro, because this is basically the creative process behind it. I got some influences, I created some stuff with that, and then I messed around a bunch, got some more ideas, and then added some ideas on top of each other. And this is how it all came together. So let's first listen to the introduction, and I'll break it down and, well, explain what I think is the most interesting. Alright, so maybe you could hear a guitar playing here. This is just me playing my classical guitar, and my goal was just to sort of give support to the rest of the track. And so the guitar sounds quite simple, but its job is just to really back everything up. Next, you could hear those synths down there. This is just some whooshes made with Serum. I think it's just like a modified soul wave, perhaps, and it just has a long attack time. So if I unfreeze this and show you the Serum patch, yeah, it's a modified soul wave. And you can see down there the attack for the whole pad. It takes 3.6 seconds to actually reach the top of this envelope. And everything, like you can see that the envelope is modulating 8 things. So it's modulating the noise level, the wavetable position, the bend, the cutoff, etc. And I wanted to have this sort of whoosh effect, like something would be played backwards. And that's how I came up with this sound. You could also hear an interesting vocal chop down there. Going from right to left and some interesting chops. The way I created this is that I just took one track, an a cappella version of a track called Pop Stars by KDA. It's actually a music for the video game League of Legends. I don't really play it, but I thought it sounded cool, and it sounds like this.
You know who it is, coming round again. You want a dose of this right now, it's KDA.
So I took this vocal chop here, and in Ableton you can decide to warp the thing. So this will allow you to stretch it in different ways, etc. And the way I reached the interesting chopping effect that you could hear just before is by using this texture mode. So those are like the different algorithms you can use when you're stretching and repitching some audio. And so this texture mode here, if you put the flux down to 0, because the flux is just like an additional component, this will create some grains that will repeat over and over again as the audio advances through time. It's a bit hard to explain, but if I just demonstrate, it will become very clear. If I just play it like this, it will not change because the tempo is still the same and it's not stretched out.
You know who it is.
But if I decide to stretch it like crazy, so by holding shift and just going like this, I can stretch the thing through time and it will sound like this.
You know who it is.
And by messing around with the grain size as well as the pitch of the sample, you can get some really interesting results. So for example, if I drop it, I don't know, 5 semitones, and I mess around with the pitch, let's listen to what it sounds like.
Round again, you want a dose of this right now, it's KDA.
I could go even further and stretch it even more like crazy, and this would sound like this if I put it like at -3.
Right now, it's KDA.
So super interesting results. I just recorded a bunch of those into audio, and this is what you can hear here. So all of those vocal chops come from this sample. Of course I put them through a bit of reverb, but you get the idea. This stretching technique is really interesting to get this kind of sounds. So those are the most interesting things in the first part of the introduction. I'll just drop into the next section here, the voice in. So the thing that stands out the most as far as I'm concerned is the Vox here. This Vox group is actually my vocals, and you can see that there's a ton of different channels. And the reason why there are so many channels is that I didn't use such a heavy pitch correction program. So I didn't use any sort of auto-tune kind of thing, but I just decided to record this one line a bunch of times, and it becomes like a choir. And you probably noticed that when a lot of people sing together, even if they're drunk and even if they don't really know how to sing, it still sounds good. This is basically the same line sung over and over again. So for example, this one sounded like this. You can hear it's not really in tune, it's not perfectly pitch correct. This one is in the center of the spectrum. I also pitched one down an octave. Sorry, I pitched it up, and this is the pitched one. This is the one that's pitched down. So all in all, they sound like this. They sound pretty okay. Even though I didn't use such a heavy pitch correcting thing, they still sound good in the mix as well, and that's what I wanted. Let's move on to the jazzy chords part here. This is basically a follow-up to the voice-in section, but this section is called jazzy chords because I decided to introduce some jazzy-ish chords here in this section. I wanted to have some sort of drive to lead into the drop. So it just took me some time. Unfortunately, I don't have the music theory to explain anything behind this. I just did it by ear. I just sat down and tried my best to produce something that I thought sounded good, and I think it sort of sounds good. So yeah, that's basically how I did it. There is a few other things going on here, a few pads, I believe. I think those were just massive presets. I just created some pads and sort of filled them in to lead into the drop. Alright, let's backtrack a bit and listen to the way into the drop. There's quite a bunch of things to talk about here. First of all, there's this lead bit that leads into the drop. And so the way I did this is that I just created a patch. This is just a saw wave made with operator, and I just put the exact same chords that were put in the jazzy chord stuff and then in the piano suite that I talked about, and I just put it into arpeggiator mode. So I dropped an arpeggiator before it, and I made it go a bit crazy so that I could get some nice feels like this. I think if I drag this out, if I unfreeze this, and if I drag this out, the whole sample, yeah, is just like going to be this kind of sounds. So most of it didn't sound good, but I really like this little bit here. I did this a few other times throughout the drop, for example here. And here. There are also those fills here, which I was quite happy with. They sound like this. So the way I came up with these fills is I first started with this audio file here. So what I did here is that I just played one note, the root note of this track, and I just made it run through a whole bunch of presets. I think it was from Serum, but basically this gave me this audio file here. And then if I go down here, you can see that there are those MIDI clips here that play all of the notes at the same time. And the reason why this is that you can see down there, hold up. You can see down there that this is an instance of a simpler, and in simpler you have the slice mode here. Slice mode allows you to slice, as its name suggests, it allows you to slice the audio in certain times or in certain ways. I decided to slice by beat and every fourth note. So all of those are chopped up versions of the bigger file that I showed you before. I dropped an arpeggiator before it because, as you can see here, there are all the notes playing at the same time. So this is one big mesh. If I remove the arpeggiator, then all of them would play at the same time. I wanted to have some smaller sounds. So I just dropped an arpeggiator in a random other mode. And this means that on all of those MIDI notes, like this, you can imagine this as like one big chord, right? So this is one big chord that's triggering. And then the arpeggiator plugin will select one random note every 16th note to be played. And each of those will trigger one little part of this sample here. So the result will sound like this. You can see down there how the playhead is different every time. So I did this with a different rate mode for all patches. This one activates every 30-second note. So I rendered those into audio and I ended up with long iterations of those 1-bit chops. And then I just chop them up so that it sounds nice in context. I talked about it before, but those are the mid-bass chops that I also used. Coming from my own vocal disgusting audio sample, whatever. This adds a bit more details to the low end of the spectrum, but let's face it, you're all here for this kind of sounds. So I decided to cut this sound into two. This is the sub bass. Playing a sub bass, so that's its job. I didn't want to fuck it up anymore. I just wanted it to play a sub bass. But what's happening on top is quite interesting. This comes out of a serum patch that I made. So my idea was to have something that gets FM'd like crazy over time. So similarly to the very long attack time that we saw in the previous patch, this one has a very long LFO modulating the FM intensity coming from the B oscillator. So over time the FM gets crazier, but the FM here is an extremely high sine wave. So what I mean by extremely high is that the wavelength of this wave here is very, very short. If I would play it, we probably couldn't hear it because it's 4 octaves up plus another octave plus some fine. So it just sounds very, very high pitched. So this acts as a very strong FM modulator. And over time, this is FM like crazy. So this creates the very metallic artifact that we can hear at the end of the bass thing. At the end of each note, I also decided to wet it in reverb like crazy. So it becomes this sort of weird metallic echo going, like some scratch of some metallic instrument. I don't know, but it sounds like this. So that's all the most interesting things in this track, in my opinion. As a way of getting back in the loop, I decided to add the guitars that we could hear at the beginning of the track here. This loop effect also happens down there in the effects group. For example, this is some white noise that is played that acts as a link between the two parts. So all in all, with all those effects and all those bits that are happening together, leading into the introduction, the loop sounds pretty much complete in my opinion. And that's how I decided to create a loop that could be played forever and ever again without seemingly stopping, I guess. I don't know. I thought it was cool. Let me know if you think this is cool. Otherwise, let me know why you don't think it's good. I don't know. In any case, I hope you found this video useful. I hope you could learn a few tricks from it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.